ghosts and aliens and ESP and cryptozoology and interdimensionals, and ultimately us, ourselves.
Ladies and gentlemen, Banal of America!
And now, ladies and gentlemen, Banal of America Audio, with your host, Tim Banal.
What is going on, my friends? This is Tim Banal of BanalofAmerica.com with another edition of BoAA Audio Season 5. Somebody asked me during the off-season if I ever worry about losing the BoAA Audio listeners when we take our lengthy hiatus between seasons, and I replied, that I'm confident in our audience being able to find us again, especially when we kick off the season with the incomparable Jim Mars. And thankfully, my confidence was rewarded this past week when we had the highest traffic ever at Banal of America. Just astounding numbers of visitors to the website and listeners to the show. Just amazing stuff. So huge thanks to all our friends who passed along word of the season premiere of BoAA Audio Season 5, and of course, enormous thanks to the amazing BoAA Audio listeners. You guys are awesome. I'm so happy that you've found us again. It's great to be back, and I'm really looking forward to the adventure that is going to be BoAA Audio Season 5. Before I preview this week's episode, let me take care of two slight items of in-house notes. First, I want to congratulate Lauren Coleman as the 2009 BoAA Audio Baseball Special Predictions Contest winner. He is the champion, edging out Greg Bishop by a very narrow margin. It was supremely tight, but Lauren Coleman is the champ. Congratulations, Lauren. And in a remarkable turn of events, I want to also congratulate US of E poster Mystery Man for besting everybody across the board, not just the folks on the forum, but also all of the esoteric superstars. This guy is amazing, got 7 out of 11 picks right. Since Lauren Coleman appeared on the special, he is by default the BoAA Audio champion this year. But I didn't want to leave Mystery Man out in the cold here. He really topped everybody, which is just stunning to me. So he is getting an unprecedented prize this year as the overall winner of the prediction contest. He's going to join the Esoteric Superstars next year on the 2010 BoAA Audio Baseball Special. So congratulations to Lauren Coleman, the BoAA Audio Baseball Special champion, and Mystery Man, the overall points winner, the US of E champion, elevating himself into the 2010 Baseball Special. Stay tuned this spring for the 4th annual Festivus devoted to America's national pastime. And while we're talking about Festivuses, it's frighteningly close to the holidays. We're already in the thick of the holiday season, and on this program, that only means one thing: the BoAA Audio Holiday Special with Stanton Friedman. For those folks who tuned in last year, they know about the really cool additional twist we added to the special last year, and I'm happy to report that it will be back. All the details on that are going to be at the end of the program. No sense filling up the front end of the show with too much in-house notes. So tune in to the end of the program for details on what we have cooking for the 5th annual BoAA Audio Holiday Special with Stanton Friedman. Now that we've taken care of the in-house notes, let's get down to business here, my friends. This week on the program, we are welcoming prolific esoteric researcher Joshua P. Warren for a BoAA Audio-style jam session that's covering a plethora of paranormal topics. I listened to this episode yesterday and was completely blown away by how quickly it goes by. It is really a very fast-paced episode, amazingly engaging conversation. Really enjoyed listening to it again. We cover a whole range of topics here this week. We're going to find out about Joshua's latest book, The Secret Wisdom of the Kukulkan. We're going to get into his research of phantomals and pet ghosts. We're going to find out about his investigation of hoaxes and why it's important to study them, his recent foray into ufology, his trips to Puerto Rico looking for mystery cryptids and studying island legends, his groundbreaking film Inside the Church of Satan, and the bizarre and terrifying demon serial rapist of Zanzibar, as well as tons and tons more. Plus, weaved into all those different subjects is a ton of fourth wall smashing discussion with Joshua Warren about the field of esoterica, the various genres of esoterica, and the changing tides of this field of folks who are studying the paranormal, as well as some really cool and spooky stories. I know folks tune into the show and they want to hear some spooky stories from guests like Joshua P. Warren, who's got into a bunch of different spooky situations. He's going to share a few really cool spooky stories for you. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Joshua P. Warren, allow me to give you a little bit of background on him. Joshua P. Warren travels the world investigating paranormal phenomena. He is the author of 10 books, including Simon & Schuster's How to Hunt Ghosts. He's appeared on the History Channel, Discovery Channel, Travel Channel, TLC, Sci-Fi, and Fine Living, and hosts Speaking of Strange, a weekend radio show on the weird and mysterious. He's also an award-winning filmmaker, having produced and directed controversial films like Inside the Church of Satan. He's the founder and president of Lemur, Lemur, a paranormal research group started in 1994, and he resides in Asheville, North Carolina. His Lemur team made the cover of a science journal in 2004 for their work on the Brown Mountain Lights and other rare ghostly plasmas in nature. His website is www.joshuapwarren.com. Pretty simple, all one word, joshuapwarren.com. I want to give a huge shout out and thanks to previous BoA Audio guest Micah A. Hanks. He's a good friend of Joshua P. Warren. I was talking to him a few days before we taped the episode and said to Micah, is there anything I should ask Joshua that I might not even notice to pick up and ask, something that might fall through the cracks that only Micah A. Hanks would know? He sent me just a ton of talking points for this interview and really built the skeleton upon which this conversation sits. So I got to give huge thanks and props to Micah A. Hanks. Thank you, sir, for your help. We give you a shout out during the episode, but I want to throw one in here at the beginning as well. So without any further ado, let's rock and roll. This interview was recorded on November 11th, 2009. Joshua P. Warren, talking about a plethora of paranormal phenomena on BoA Audio, Season 5. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Banal of America Audio. We've got a really cool guest here on the line for you this week. He is one of the world's foremost paranormal investigators. He really can speak to a whole bunch of different realms in the world of esoterica. He's, I think, mostly well known for his ghost research, but he's done a whole bunch of other stuff. I mean, I could just go on and on and on with some of the stuff he's looked at. Lately, it's been hoaxes, but he's also looked at the Church of Satan. He's gone down to Puerto Rico to study some of the mysteries down there. He's also sort of starting to branch into the UFO realm, and he's talked a little bit about mystery cryptids as well, scary cryptids and stuff like that. Frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM. He's appeared on numerous TV shows and TV channels, History Channel, Discovery Channel, TLC, Sci-Fi, and hosts his own weekend radio show, Speaking of Strange. So he's an author, he's a broadcaster, he's a researcher. He really is a renaissance man, not just in his output, but also in the topics that he covers. He is the amazing Joshua P. Warren. Great to have you on the show finally, Joshua. Welcome to BoA Audio.
Well, thank you, Tim. It is a great thrill to finally be here with you, and hey, what a wonderful introduction. I need to have that repeated every time I go somewhere new. That was cool.
Well, I'll see what I can do. We'll get you set up with some kind of soundbite or transcript of that.
Okay.
And he's written 10 books at least here, from what I'm looking at, and he's got just a boatload of websites. So many that if I listed them all, we'd be here all afternoon. So I guess the hub to look for right now will be joshuapwarren.com. And from there, I'm sure you can sort of jump off to all the different other ones that are out there.
Yeah, that's right, joshuapwarren.com, and there is no period after the P, but I try to sort of compile everything there and at least have references and links to all the little projects. And then, of course, there is also material that is relevant to whatever I happen to be working on at any given time that I kind of change on maybe a weekly or bi-weekly basis.
And also, I should point out, you're the founder and president of Lemur, which is one of the powerhouse paranormal investigative teams out there. So kudos to you. It sounds like, you've been doing the lemur thing since like the mid-'90s, so you're kind of ahead of the curve, because nowadays it's like you can't get down to the store to get a gallon of milk without bumping into 2 or 3 ghost groups. So, it's good to see that you sort of were ahead of the curve on all that.
Well, yeah, thank you. It's really amazing. I founded Lemur in 1995, and I founded it out of necessity because I just couldn't gather enough data by myself to form some comprehensive opinions on some of the activity I was investigating. And back when I founded Lemur, there was controversy about it. I mean, for one thing, I live here in Asheville, North Carolina, and this is literally Billy Graham land, and there are a lot of really conservative fundamentalist Christians around here who for a long time have believed that it was, evil to even go to a haunted place to talk about this. And for me to see what has happened just in the past 15 years in terms of the exposure the field has gotten on TV and the amount of people who have embraced it, it's just incredible. It's remarkable. And so, yeah, now I feel like that I guess we achieved the goal. We have people out there gathering data, but now it's become a little more complicated to differentiate between the serious and the non-serious.
Yeah. Nowadays you got too many people out there collecting data. You don't know who to turn to. And as I was saying, you've got so much stuff going on, and you're one of those guys in esoterica, and I mean this like at the highest compliment, that we almost sometimes don't find out how you really got into all of this stuff, because you're always talking about the latest thing that you have going on. You sort of remind me a little bit of like the Peter Davenports and the Linda Moulton Howes and stuff like that, who are always have some new information, always have some new investigation or some new project that they're talking about. And for the folks like me who've been in this field for a brief amount of time, 5 or 6 years, it's like you're a staple of the field, but we have no idea like how you got into all this. So let's talk a little bit about that. For starters, how did you even get interested in the esoteric to the point where now you're so prolific and doing all this different stuff?
Well, my family has lived here in the Blue Ridge Mountains of western North Carolina, which are the oldest mountains in North America, since the 1600s.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I'm some of the earliest Europeans who came over here. And I grew up hearing a lot of stories about, these various legends and spooky phenomena in the mountains. But there was one thing in particular that sort of affected my family profoundly. Back during the Great Depression, my grandmother, who is now dead, she was, I think, 12 or 13 years old, and she took a photograph of her brother and their father, these two sort of rugged mountain men who had just come back from a small game hunting trip. And when the photograph developed, her older brother, named Claude, did not have a head in the photo, and they couldn't explain why this had developed, and he was headless, but, they didn't understand enough about photography to really make any sense of it. And then about 1 month later, Claude was sitting on the porch on a summer afternoon reading a copy of a magazine, and he was having this conversation with their father, named Jack, in the kitchen, and he was preparing lunch. And at one point, Jack spoke to Claude, and there was no answer. And he repeated himself, and there was no answer. And he went outside to bring the lunch, and here's Claude's magazine there on the porch, but Claude was gone. And as the old proverb goes, Claude was never seen nor heard from again.
Whoa.
This guy, my great-uncle, had just vanished in literally mid-conversation in the blink of an eye. And this went beyond some kind of mythology. This was a tragedy that affected my family. People were, the rest of their lives, they were torn up over the fact that this, he was in his 20s, and, a guy that they loved and knew in his 20s just disappeared. And so I knew this was real, and this sort of opened my mind at an early age to all the possibilities of how that there may be other dimensions, or there may be some process by which we can actually disappear from this realm into some other place. And when I was, I guess, 13 or 14, I started writing my first published book that was published when I was 14, and it was a book of scary fictional short stories and poems. And the book did well enough that I got a job writing for the local newspaper. So here I was, 15 years old. I couldn't even drive myself, and my parents were taking me around to interview people. And I got such a great response to the ghost stories because we have a very rich history in this area, but nobody had ever written a book of the ghost stories. And so by the time I was 18, I wrote this book called Haunted Asheville, which to this day is the regional bestseller, I'm told, and that really sort of catapulted the direction of my life, because every time I published something, I got a whole slew of people contacting me, telling me about other places to investigate, and I realized that, you know, if there is value and rarity, these are some of the rarest experiences you can have, and I've been self-employed now since I was 18 years old, just solely finding ways to take what I love, investigating the unknown, and turn it into a career.
Wow, yeah. I'm still blown away by this story of your great uncle, because you don't hear too many vanishing stories, really. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. And, you know, a lot of these stories that you do hear seem kind of anecdotal, but, you know, I went back as an adult, and I talked in person, face-to-face, with all of these elderly people who lived in the community, who knew Claude, who were around when this happened, who participated in search parties, and they all told me the same story, and that doesn't happen very often, but they all said, no, this is what happened. You know, the guy was sitting there, he was having a conversation, and all of a sudden, he was gone. And it also caused scandal. There were people who said, well, surely he must have been murdered, of course, you know, because you can't just disappear. And so this was a pretty profound thing that opened my mind, and I, at an early age, accepted the paranormal, so to speak, is something that has real tangible consequences in life.
Yeah, I'm just still kind of mind-boggled by that, because even when you hear vanishing stories, it's usually someone, they're traveling somewhere and they vanish. It's like, but to be stationary and vanish, very weird. Now, let's talk a little bit about the new book you have. It's The Secret Wisdom of the Kukulkan. So I guess tell people a little bit about what that's all about. Give us a thumbnail look at it, and we'll sort of explore some of the territory covered in the book.
Yeah, well, you know, this book is unlike any book I've ever written. And, in fact, I'll say right off the bat, it's the strangest book I've ever written, because what I decided to do was to sit down and take stock of what I had learned over the past 20 or so years and look at what I think is the connection between ghosts and aliens and ESP and cryptozoology and interdimensionals, and ultimately us, you know, ourselves, because you find the more you study these phenomena that you might begin with one particular category, but if you stick with it long enough, you start seeing these connections between all of them. And it's kind of like, as Charles Fort said, you can measure a circle beginning anywhere. And so I decided to condense everything that I had learned into this concise volume. It's only a little over 100 pages long, because we live in a very fast-paced, distracted culture, and I wanted to get right to the point. And as I was writing it, there were actually things that I was realizing for the first time, especially by the time I kind of got to the end of the book, and the real engine behind the story came from a trip I took to the Mayan ruins in Central America at Lamanai, which are the most secluded of the Mayan ruins. And for a long time, I didn't know what to think about this whole 2012 thing. You know, I was very sort of fuzzy, and I didn't want to commit to any ideas about it. But once you start really digging into it, you understand there's a great deal of significance to the Mayan understanding of 2012. And so here I was down in the middle of this jungle with monkeys swinging from the trees and crocodiles in the river, and it was a big ordeal to get there, and I'm standing on top of this Mayan pyramid, and I thought this was going to be a cool experience, just to go down there and see something that has been hidden for so long. What I did not expect was that I would discover something that actually pushed forth the understanding of what may have happened all those thousands of years ago. And what I mean by that is that right in the middle of the ruins at Lamanai, the guide I was with showed us that there was a chamber that some archaeologists discovered And this was in the middle of their most sacred spot there. And when they overturned this circular stone, and the chamber underneath had liquid mercury inside.
Whoa.
And this had been put there thousands of years ago. And archaeologists have no idea how or where they got this. And the process of refining it back then is a strange thing. And it was just one of those quirky little things that they couldn't make sense of. But I learned this, and this meant something to me. See, I started doing research, and I found that also liquid mercury had been found in chambers in the Egyptian pyramids and tombs, and the Chinese pyramids and tombs, and all around the world, but nobody had ever tried to make sense of this. Also, in the Indian texts, the Vedic text, the Vishnu, they talked about the fact that there were visitors who had come from beyond in liquid mercury-powered engines. And furthermore, in the 1930s, the Nazis, who went to Central and South America on expeditions that led to them setting up compounds down there, they studied these ruins, and then they created this experiment regarding Die Glocke, the bell, which of course was this big metallic apparatus that had two counter-rotating cylinders of liquid mercury inside, and when it was fired up by all real reports from people like Jim Mars and Joseph P. Farrell, things that have been substantiated, this device would lose weight. It had an anti-gravity property. It would actually rise up. It also put off a deadly radiation, and it apparently could affect space-time because clocks and watches that were close to it would run slightly slower. And so I sort of assembled all this into a concept that maybe the reason we have this liquid mercury appearing in all these sites from thousands of years ago where people were worshiping visitors from beyond is because this is a real component of the technology that was being used by those visitors, and that therefore we can use that as a yardstick by which to measure what those ancient people were trying to tell us that those visitors told them about what was going to happen when they returned. And so a part of this whole Kukulkan book is about trying to explain what I think is going to happen around, December 21st of 2012.
Oh, I don't know if I want to spoil anything. So give us a teaser, I guess, of what you think will happen on 2012.
Well, I think that the universe goes through these seasons very much like the Earth does. There is an ebb and flow of frequencies that change very measurably. And the reason that one thing is physical to another thing is because they both resonate within a certain frequency range. And if they are too out of phase, they become non-physical to each other, which is why that we can't feel a radio wave or a microwave, but they exist. They are something we've learned to harness, but we don't experience them personally in any immediate way. So as the universe goes through cycles where frequencies sort of change, there are times when things become more or less physical to each other. And by all accounts, I think that on December 21st of 2012, we are going to be at a point in a cosmic cycle at which it's going to be easier for these beings. I call them paratemporals, actually, which is a general term. These beings are going to actually be able to access our physical dimension more easily than they have been able to for a long time, and that it's not like necessarily a switch is going to be flipped on December 21st, but that will be the beginning of a gradual increase that will increase probably for another 1,000 years, actually, of these interactions with these beings. And so I think that the reason we are at a point right now at which we have so many people, so many groups and investigators interested in the paranormal is because there is something in the collective consciousness here that's preparing us for the fact that these things we call paranormal are about to become normal, and we are about to be inundated, starting with 2012 and going into the years beyond, with a mass visitation of these beings, as was reported in the literature of virtually every major culture around the world 2,000 to 5,000 years ago.
Whoa. So you're talking about all kinds of different things, like aliens, Bigfoot, ghosts, all those various things that are sort of out of reach from us right now?
Yes, I definitely think that there is a relationship between all of them in the fact that ultimately it's all really about breaching an interdimensional gap.
Yeah.
And of course, it happens most of the time on a very limited basis. But I firmly believe that, for example, a cryptid like Bigfoot is not a physical, biological, normal organism. Now, the Bigfoot might be physical. I mean, I've talked to a lot of people who I think are sincere, who say they've seen, a physical Bigfoot. But I do not believe that there is an 800 to 1,200 pound, 8-foot tall ape living in the United States of America, as reported in all 50 states every single year. And we don't have more evidence. I mean, come on, we should have a lot more evidence, more hair, more waste. I mean, more of an impact on the ecology. And yet we do have these stories about somebody tracking a Bigfoot and finding that its footsteps or its footprints just disappear in mid-pathway. And what you find is that when you start looking at ghosts and aliens and cryptids, the one common thread they all have, as well as psychic phenomena, is that there is always this distortion of time. And what I mean by that is that when you look at ghosts, often you are looking at something from the past. So obviously you've got your time sort of slip there. And then when it comes to aliens, well, all the time we get reports about a flying saucer that will appear over a car, and the car will stop working. Mm-hmm. And then the saucer will fly away, and the car starts working again. The person in the driver's seat doesn't have to turn the ignition again. It's not like the motor was stopped. It was almost like time had been frozen there for a second. And then when you have these reports about a cryptid like Bigfoot walking down a pathway, and then all of a sudden he's gone, well, his space has changed, so obviously his time has changed, and space and time work in tandem.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, yeah, I see what you're saying. Mm-hmm. I'm in pretty much agreement with you in the sense that there is some kind of like unified field theory of the paranormal that we need to sort of start to unlock, or once we get one figured out, the rest will sort of start to fall into place pretty quickly thereafter.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, we know that everything must connect at some level, and the problem with the paranormal so far has been it has been so divided and broken amongst these sort of small, weird factions of outcasts that there has been very little done to centralize all the data that's been collected. And usually you find groups out there who make it clear that they specialize in one area or another.
Yeah.
And you don't see many people who are putting all the pieces together.
Yeah, exactly. Well, at least it seems like in the last few years that's starting to change a little bit now, where people are starting to become more open to looking at all the pieces together and trying to come up with some kind of, like I said, unified field theory, because all the different groups of genres of esoterica have been trying to reach an answer for their specific mystery for years to no avail. So I think that people are starting to realize that, maybe as a, let's say, for instance, as a ghost researcher, maybe I should look at UFOs a little bit, because maybe there's something there that I haven't seen yet that might explain more about ghosts to me. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Different people interpret different things in different ways, or sometimes they interpret the same thing in different ways. And, recently I was telling a friend, if a little green man runs into a room, one person will say, oh, there's an alien. Somebody else will say, oh, there's a leprechaun. Somebody else will say, oh, there's a demon. And so you really sort of restrict your research potential if you limit yourself to the definition that somebody gives for a being that is not universally agreed upon.
Exactly. Now let's talk a little bit about the pet ghosts, because this is kind of interesting to me because I'm a pet owner, but only a hamster, so nothing serious as far as pets go. And I know I should put over our good friend here, our good mutual friend Micah A. Hanks, who really unloaded a ton of talking points for me regarding this interview. In preparation for the interview, he just sent me tons of stuff to ask you about. So a lot of the heads-up research has been done by Micah, thankfully. I mean, he really just helped me out huge. So big thanks to Micah. He told me to call you a scallywag also. I don't know if that resonates. I guess it does.
I've heard that before, yes.
Okay. I guess talk a little bit about what this is, your research into pet ghosts, and Micah said you prefer the term phantomals. So I do like that. Is this actual ghosts of animals, or is it just sort of ghosts, that resemble animals, if that makes any sense?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and I'm glad that Micah brought that up because, Micah has a great background in cryptozoology, and so he also has sort of had to struggle with how we define these things. One of the big reasons that a lot of these mysteries we study are still mysteries is because we haven't used a proper language in order to all communicate effectively about the same things. And when I started writing a book, which ended up being called Pet Ghost. That was the name the publisher gave it. I would have probably called it Phantomals, but they wanted to call it Pet Ghost because they thought it was more marketable. I was writing a book about paranormal entities that appear more animal-like than human-like.
Okay.
And what I found was that as I wrote this book, it became really laborious to try to explain the types of creatures I was writing about with one word, because there was no singular word that represents that definition I just gave you. You have people talking about cryptids, but a lot of people, there are animals that are cryptids that are normal physical biological organisms. I mean, the giant panda or the coelacanth or, so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. And there was just no word that existed anywhere in the lexicon. And I looked very intensely that would allow me to conveniently describe all these creatures, everything from Mothman to an interdimensional being, to an animal ghost, and so I created this word phantomal that would allow me to communicate that, and apparently a lot of other people have also found it to be useful.
Yeah, it does make sense. It sort of does clear that up, because like I said, when you hear pet ghosts at first, you think that it's like the ghost of someone's cat or something that came back to visit them. That's not really what the book really is, though, is it?
Well, all that stuff is in there.
Okay.
I mean, it's got cats and dogs, and it also has got the weird stuff like Mothman, and I even talk about things that press the boundary of how we think of an animal reaction to death. Let me give you an example. According to every study that I was able to find that has been done along these lines, when a person dies, or an animal dies for that matter, there are flies that appear on that dead body within 5 or 10 minutes that have come from miles and miles, sometimes 20, 30 miles away.
Oh, wow.
And scientists cannot explain how that these flies so quickly knew that the body had died, because there's no evidence that any of the particles had drifted through the air, anything associated with decomposition.
Yeah.
And so we don't know how that these creatures so quickly know when something has died. Well, I looked at that and I said, well, maybe there is some kind of an energy field of death itself. There is some type of a process that's taking place here when a soul or when a spirit is transitioning, and there are creatures that after millions of years have evolved to be sensitive to that. And that's also why you have these situations when you hear stories once in a while on the news about a nursing home, and they have a little kitty who always goes and curls up in the lap of the person who's about to die in about 2 hours, and they say, how does this little kitty know that this person is on their deathbed? And it's probably because that we don't usually think of them this way, but dogs and cats are predators. I mean, they've survived all these years by knowing when something is sick and about to die and when it's weak, and that's what they do to eat.
Yeah.
And so I also talk about harbingers and the idea that there are creatures that will appear around a paranormal, or in some cases a morbid sort of scenario, because that they have evolved this natural ability to be sensitive to these things that we aren't sensitive to so much anymore.
Yeah, that would make sense. That's interesting. I'd like to see more studies done on that kind of thing, but it would be kind of a hard thing to really study, I guess. You'd have to have some kind of like dying animal under, who knows, some kind of special supervision of, electromagnetic light fields and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're right. There is so much that needs to be done to experiment with animals. In fact, I've even put some proposals together, and so far we haven't made much progress with them. But if you look at the entire animal kingdom, from microorganisms all the way up, what you find is that almost everything that we associate with psychic ability is in some way demonstrated by an animal. I mean, sharks have a sixth sense for magnetism, and electric eels have these cells that are able to produce these incredible voltages that can kill things. Penguins can see ultraviolet light, and if you continue down that course and you look at, there are lizards who regenerate their limbs and all this. Betwixt us all as organisms, we can do all these things that we usually consider paranormal or supernatural if a human can supposedly do it. And yet, when you look at us under a microscope, we're all made of the same material. We are all, carbon-based organic life forms here, and it therefore seems to me that we should try to take representatives across the animal kingdom and test them out to see which ones seem to be most psychic, however you want to define that, and then examine the DNA of those creatures and see what we can learn about those abilities that we separate so much from what is possible for us as humans. Exactly.
It makes you wonder sometimes if that's the kind of thing that's been done in underground, nefarious sort of situations. Not to get too conspiratorial or anything like that, but you look at that new movie there, The Men Who Stare at Goats, and you wonder, if this research has been done somewhere and we just haven't been told about it yet.
Well, that's a good point, and I think that you're probably right about that, because there are so many sensitivities surrounding animals in general, and the idea of being, politically correct and how you deal with that. And here we are. It's November as we have this conversation, and Thanksgiving is along the way. And I know that there are people who talk about turkey murder every year, and so yeah, there are all these considerations that you'd have to deal with in public. But the military is it's so valuable yet so inaccessible, because militaries, they don't care about whether or not they can explain how something works. All they care about is whether or not it works. And over the years, I've had contact with people in the military who have worked on these projects that are so controversial. In fact, speaking of The Men Who Stare at Goats, a prominent player in that is Colonel John Alexander.
Oh, yeah.
And I was a guest at his home for an evening just earlier this year, as a matter of fact. I was out in Nevada speaking at the International UFO Congress, and I got to go over and spend an evening with him and his wife, and they were great hosts and hostesses, and host and hostess. But at one point, I went into his office, and his home is really extraordinary. I mean, on the walls, he just has dozens and dozens of pictures of him doing the kinds of things that you and I can only dream about. You're walking around, and he's like, "Oh, here I am in Antarctica. Here I am with a gorilla in the jungles. Here I am riding a camel in front of the Great Pyramid. Here I am on top of Mount Everest. That kind of stuff."
Yeah.
And so finally, we went up to his office, and on all the walls there were stills from his TV appearances. Here he is with Larry King, and here he is with Geraldo, and right in the middle of all this is a shadow box that contained a spoon that was sort of twisted and melted, and there was a brass plate on it that said, Uri Geller, and it had a date on it. And I asked him about it, and he told me that he had been standing right there in front of Uri Geller. Apparently, I don't know if this was a base or whatever they were on, but he said he handed Uri Geller a spoon. Geller took it straight from his hand, and he watched this thing just bend right over and twist around and melt, and he handed it back to him. And this was in the context of some kind of military training education. And I know that Uri Geller has done underhanded things. I mean, I've seen pretty good evidence of him on TV shows using magnets and stuff to create effects. But but Colonel John Alexander is convinced, as far as I'm concerned, that not only did Geller do this, but he had seen a lot of people that were involved in military training who had done paranormal things that were very valuable for the U.S. military. And so I know personally just how seriously those guys in the military take the paranormal.
Absolutely. And then now just to smash the fourth wall a little bit, and I know some audience members of my show sometimes complain that we do smash the fourth wall too much, but hey, that's what I'm interested in, so we're going to go there. And we kind of talked about how you formed Lemur in 1995, and how you guys really were, way ahead of the curve as far as these ghost hunting groups go and stuff. I guess, what's your take on this explosion of ghost hunting in the last 5 or 6 years, where, I think before you guys probably could have gone and investigated just about anything, but nowadays it's like these investigations are turning into turf wars, and we're just sort of like, getting a whole bunch of different people, weekend warriors, if you will, and amateur ghost hunters who probably aren't really doing the field a service because they just see it on TV and think that they can be ghost hunters now, and sort of oversaturates the field, if you will, and not to mention all these different ghost hunting shows, because there's like so many of them now.
Yeah, well, I really think that the TV impact is the crux of all this. And, over the years I've been on Discovery and Travel Channel and History Channel and National Geographic, and in fact I was on Animal Planet just last night, and TLC, and at one point I had a 4-year exclusive talent contract with Discovery, and I really know the TV business pretty well. And yet I don't watch any of these TV shows. I will watch documentaries on the History Channel. I think the History Channel does a great job.
Yeah.
But I don't watch these shows like Ghost Hunters and Ghost Adventures, and there's a whole list of these, Paranormal State, and because I've just watched bits and pieces, and I immediately get this feeling that I'm looking at something that is so staged that I have seen this happen. I mean, I've been on a set before. I was doing a supposed documentary one time for one of these major channels, and I was supposed to comment on the Brown Mountain Lights. And the director came up to me and says, okay, Joshua, here's your script, and Brian, here's your script. And I said, script? And I opened this thing up, and sure enough, this was a teleplay. It says, Joshua says this, and, Brian says, and I said, I'm not going to read this. I'm not here to be an actor.
Yeah.
I'm here to do an honest interview. And so I have very little respect for the TV business, but what I found was that it was only a matter of time, and it kind of started happening, really, I guess, it's not been that long ago. I mean, I guess it was around the early 2000s when people in the TV business began to realize that to tape a ghost hunt is pretty cheap.
Mm-hmm.
Because all you really do is you just get a group of people who have, various personality types, and you put them in a supposedly stressful or tense situation, and you give them some meters that make little whiny noises and have blinking lights on them and so forth. and that it costs almost nothing to go out and edit this together and get people to watch it. And I think that is the very practical reason that we have an explosion of all of this TV. And you, unfortunately, at that point, start attracting people to the field who are interested in being celebrities, who are interested in the whole showbiz point of view, versus the reality of trying to understand on a scientific or otherwise basis more about what's happening. And so there is this just glossy commercial aspect that has just been ushered in. And another thing that's so sad about this is, I remember years ago I was talking to a colleague. I won't use his name without permission, but he's a well-known person in the ghost research field. And this was right around the time I wrote a book called How to Hunt Ghosts.
Yeah.
Has done really well. And he sat down with me and he said, you know, I used to do all these ghost TV shows. And this guy's a doctor, mind you.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, I got to the point where I see all these TV shows, and they're out there, they're selling commercials, and, you know, they're making money, but they don't want to pay me anything. So I told him, you know, I'm only going to appear on your program if you pay me for the time, because otherwise I could be out here making money as I ordinarily do.
Yeah.
But instead of paying him to get a real expert, they prefer to go with Joe Bob down the street here, who has a web page saying, well, I'm a paranormal investigator and I'll do it for free.
Exactly.
And so what we have here is a cumulative effect of people who really don't know a lot about the subject matter, and yet they become the representatives for the field in the media, and this chain reaction has continued, and now we have a lot of people who really aren't qualified. They don't know how that little squeaky box with the blinking lights in their hand actually works. You know, you ask them, what is an electromagnetic field? You know, what is an electrostatic charge? They don't have an answer for you, but they're looking for some kind of excitement and glamour, and there's nothing wrong with that, but we have to identify it for what it is.
Yeah, and the unfortunate part is the people like you and me know what's going on, but it's the people who are sort of neophytes to the field that watch, they don't realize that aspect of what we're talking about.
Well, you know, I'm always happy to be tested. You know, I tell people, ask me what I'm talking about, and don't take for granted that, you know, I could be BSing you here. You know, I'm very proud of the fact that my team and I made the cover of a science journal in 2004, and I don't know of any other quote unquote, you know, paranormal research team that has ever made the cover of a science journal. And we did that for some of our groundbreaking work on how that anomalous spherical plasmas like ball lightning are formed in nature. And this came from looking into the Brown Mountain Lights, which for so long have always been considered just an old ghost story. And, you know, I definitely don't know everything, but I will tell you that I don't go out there in the public talking about things that I don't really know about. You know, I know what I'm talking about, and I see a lot of people around me who might, I think, do not.
Exactly. Now, that kind of is a pretty good bridge, I guess, into the next thing I want to talk to you about, and that's this Hoax Research Center. It sounds like you've been doing a lot of research into hoaxes, which is sort of an interesting angle to look at in esoterica, because it seems like often once a hoax is rooted out, people just want to throw it in the trash bin and get away from it and not actually deal with, you know, what the hoaxers did and how we can identify future hoaxes based on what we've seen, which sounds like what you guys are doing with the Hoax Research Center.
That's exactly right, and that's a very good way of phrasing it, actually, because I remember when I was growing up and I was reading books about UFOs, how once in a while I'd come across a story about, you know, some guys taking some birthday candles and putting them in a big balloon and sending them up in the air, and the next thing you know, somebody's called the cops. And when time progressed to the point to which, you know, we started getting a lot of UFO photos sent to us and UFO videos, and people were saying, you know, how could this possibly be a conventional craft? I mean, an airplane can't do this. Well, I wondered, well, is this an airplane? I mean, what if this is some tiny little thing? You know, well, how do we know that we can offer some authoritative opinion here on fact versus fiction if we have not got any kind of real database here, because you might see a picture or a video clip once in a while saying, well, this is a UFO that is remote controlled, or this is something that I hooked to a hot air balloon or a helium balloon and put up, but you don't know the dimensions of the thing, you don't know the weight of it, you don't know the conditions under which it was shot. And so I figured that really the only way that we could ever give any kind of accurate opinion on whether or not a UFO photo or a ghost photo or a cryptid photo or anything like that might be real is to understand how we can rule out what's not real. And that's a pretty basic premise in the rest of science, but it's actually kind of rare and it's sort of controversial in terms of paranormal phenomena, because there's this impression that if you get out there studying hoaxes that you're just trying to learn how to be a hoaxer.
Yeah.
And but that's not it at all. I mean, so I created an event that has run for years now, the Speaking of Strange UFO Experience, in which we invite creative engineers and artists to come from all over the country and build fake UFOs that have to be able to fly, and they must be safe, and they put them up in the air. And we're not trying to fool anybody, to pretend like these are real, but, we put them up in the air and we take pictures and we videotape them. And we now have, to my knowledge, the only database in the world, at least on the civilian level here, of faked UFOs. And I know the budget and I know the challenges, and, I have all this information that we've gathered. And over time, this has expanded outside of UFOs. And at this point, I'm pretty good at looking at UFO pictures or video footage and immediately getting an intuitive sort of reaction and determining whether or not this looks like it's real or not, because I've now seen, hundreds of fake ones. And I know exactly how they were built and how they probably flew the thing. But over time, I've had to pay more and more attention to other areas, just like, when that Bigfoot body deal was hoaxed down in Georgia.
Yeah.
Which was just more or less right down the road, a couple hours down the road from where I live. And so, it's important to know what's fake so you can rule out fakes. It just makes logical sense to me.
Yeah, exactly. And like you said, it's like people in the paranormal field, they don't want to deal with hoaxes once it's been proven to be a hoax. They just, completely block their ears out, and they're like, la, 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 whatever, don't tell me any more about this. And it's like, no, we need to look at this more a little bit, because that way we can kind of prevent this from happening again.
Yeah, well, history repeats itself. And, if you look back, people have been up to the same old tricks for a long, long time, and everybody's always trying to make a cheap, fast buck somewhere. And I don't think that issue of how things are hoaxed is being properly addressed. And so one thing we're doing right now with the Hoax Research Center is coming up with a list of red flags that something could be a hoax. And this comes from not only observing hoaxes and knowing how they're produced, but also from in-depth interviews with hoaxers. I mean, I talked for a long time to the guys who did the Bigfoot hoax for months, and had a lot of, personal, private conversations with them about, what was going on in their heads and why they did this. And it's funny because in some cases it's understandable. Somebody just wants to make some money. But in other cases, somebody just wants attention, or it's just sort of like a big prank or big gag. And in fact, at one of our UFO experiences, a guy named Jeff Wilson, who was our champion for maybe 3 years in a row, he created this big, incredible-looking triangular UFO that he put up into the sky at night with helium balloons, and it had lasers on it that were shooting down through fog, and, it just was a really impressive-looking thing. And somebody took that video footage and put it on the Internet, along with a big report about how this was actually real footage from Dublin, and, they had quotes from real politicians. There was supposed to be a politician who saw it and a police officer who saw it. These were real people, and they had their quotes, and it was just a very believable report. And and yet I've got this Dublin Irish triangle sitting in my guest bedroom right now. And so, to me, that was a great example of how we have to face the fact that people do hoax things. And there is too much of a tendency right now in the field for, I believe, investigators to look at something and either say, well, this is either real or it's just something that's misleading us in terms of our ability to examine it, and they don't think about the conscious human intent to create absolute fabrications.
Exactly. Do you think that there's a rise in hoaxes nowadays? Because I don't seem to feel it, but since you're sort of looking at hoaxes on a more serious level and actually acknowledging them, I think I'm probably of the same sort of mindset, probably to a fault, that I was sort of criticizing other people in the paranormal field for, where if it's like a hoax, I'm just usually like, all right, that's a hoax, next, what's next coming up, what's the next big news item? But do you think there's an uptick in hoaxes in the last few years with the, explosion of the internet, or is it something that's just, maybe we're just seeing them more than we used to?
I think that it might be a bit of both, because for one thing, we don't see very many hoaxes that we kind of consider malicious. And that's kind of a funny word to use anyway, because I don't know that any hoax is really malicious in terms of the paranormal.
Yeah.
It's usually kind of a jokester type of situation. And yet, like with the Bigfoot guys, I think that a lot of people use this word malicious because, there was the impression that somebody's being duped out of $50,000 here.
Yeah.
And that's not a very nice thing to do. So most of the time, I think that it's very, very easy for us to go to a toy store now and buy something that looks impressive when you throw it up in front of a camera, whether it's an LED array or it literally is a little, remote-controlled flying saucer, which, you can buy for $20, or something you can hook to a birthday balloon. I think that we are seeing more and more people who are playing the role of little Steven Spielbergs out there, shooting something that looks interesting and they're just throwing it on the internet and not really talking about what it is, or maybe they just use some wording which would lead you to believe that it could be something more than it is. So that is happening a lot more often. But I don't think that we have a real rise in terms of people who are out there trying to orchestrate a hoax that's going to meet criminal requirements.
In the paranormal world, that's the threshold you have to worry about. So.
Yeah, right.
Now, you said you spoke at the UFO Congress in Laughlin. Now, what's a nice ghost hunter like you want to get mixed up in this retarded world of UFOs for?
Yeah, that was actually a big surprise for me, because even though I've always said we specialize in ghost research, but I understand the connections between it all, and we're more than happy to look into all these different facets. It was a bit of a surprise to get a call and be asked to speak at the largest UFO Congress in the entire world, and they wanted to talk to me about the hoaxes. And I knew that I might not get an opportunity to go back to that conference because, it is a big one. So I talked about hoaxes, and I gave examples of, guidelines you can use to help you rule out a hoax. But I also took the opportunity to do something I don't think they quite expected. I said, now let's look at things that obviously are not hoaxes. And I took them down that path as well and tried to guide many of the researchers away from this nuts and bolts approach to UFOs that has really gone nowhere over the past 60 or so years.
Yeah.
And that's why we keep, we're spinning our wheels because you have people out there, and there is one very, very famous UFO researcher, and I won't mention his name here, but I had a personal conversation with him, and I asked him what he thought about the idea that some of these UFOs could be tulpas. And he said, well, what's a tulpa? Now, to the average person, that may not be a big deal. But if you're an expert and you've been doing this for, so many decades, you should know what the concept of a tulpa is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And he said, look, I'm telling you, these are straight up, strict nuts and bolts. You know, he's been given the same old spiel for decades. And I think that if these were nothing more than physical craft coming here from another rock out there, we would have more evidence by now. And also, I think that we must acknowledge that even if they are from another rock out there, they are shifting this relationship between space and time and matter and all that in order to create an interdimensional type of effect. And that's the level at which we have to look to understand these. And unfortunately, right now in the UFO field, there are a lot of people who aren't keeping up with the latest research regarding the holographic universe, or what I call the holosentient universe, and the idea that, you know, you're not just some helpless little being sitting back watching this interaction of particles bounce around in front of you, that you actually are a collaborator, that you participate in the experience of reality, and that 2 or 3 people can be standing outside and see a UFO at the same time, and each person sees something different because they are partially creating that experience.
It's troubling, but, you know, you get that old school mentality in ufology where, you know, it's hard to really sort of break people's expectations of, they sort of have their opinion of what it is, and that's all there is to it in their mind. So they made their mind up a long time ago what UFOs are, and they're just trying to assemble all the pieces to prove it, whether the square peg fits in the round hole or not.
Well, you know, you're right, and I think that is probably a great description of the problem altogether with science in general. You know, people take a vested interest in whatever they bring up that they believe is the proper explanation for anything, not just something paranormal. And, you know, people ask me sometimes, why is it that we don't have more of these mainstream credible scientists who are spending time working on these mysteries? And for one thing, I should say that it is unfortunate that usually the most apt people, the people who are most qualified to work on these hard mysteries, are not the ones who are doing it. And the reason is because that paranormal phenomena is by definition inconsistent and unpredictable. And studying inconsistent and unpredictable phenomena does not pay the bills.
Yeah.
And that's what these people are doing at these universities. They're paying their bills. You know, this is their job, and you don't want to sit down before the board every year and say, no, I really haven't figured this one out yet. You know, so they decide to focus on the more crude and reliable and lower level things that have practicality, and that's, you know, we've made great leaps and bounds because of that, but that's why that we don't have the best people working on the paranormal mysteries.
Yeah, exactly. That makes sense, because even the people who were doing the paranormal mysteries as their full-time gig, like you and me, it's still hard to get by. So It's like, you know, I can't even imagine what it would be like if I had a family and stuff like that. I probably wouldn't even be able to do this. So.
Yeah, well, you're right about that. And I don't have children, and my wife and I, we do not want children because we realize that, you know, we'd rather use our resources to work on things that we enjoy, and when we can, spend that money on ourselves.
Exactly. Who'd want to bring a child into this crazy world anyway right now? That's like child cruelty in and of itself. So.
Yeah, I've never understood that, really.
So, you know, the webpage or whatever is just something that you guys do for fun. Do you have a real job?
Well, that is our job.
Oh.
We don't technically get money for the hours we put in, but it is our job.
You're listening to Banal of America Audio.
When you spoke at the UFO Congress and you know, talked about this hoax research, and obviously the hoax research you're doing is sort of getting out there now and people are hearing more about it, what was the reaction like from the UFO community to someone doing this kind of research into hoaxes?
You know, actually, all the feedback that I got was pretty positive. I did feel like that there were some people out there who felt like, you know, who is this kid who's coming along here and trying to, you know, rattle this foundation that we've tried to build for so many years. But most people, however, were refreshed because the fact of the matter is, I've gone to a lot of conferences, and I travel around and I get hired to speak on different things, and most of the content at conferences is boring. It's the same old stuff that's just being repeated over and over again. And whenever somebody comes up before the audience and actually is trying to present something new, something refreshing, I think that at very least it's interesting, and if nothing more, it's entertaining. And so I think people enjoyed what I had to say, but I also got a feeling that there were also people who may have been more indebted to the traditional mindset that these are just nuts and bolts craft with creatures coming from another rock who were perturbed by the idea that I was talking about something they might think of as more philosophical or metaphysical.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you always sort of run into that debate in the paranormal community, the UFO community, really, of nuts and bolts versus quote-unquote something else, I guess you could say. Micah was telling me you spent a lot, this is his words actually, you spent a hell of a lot of time down in Puerto Rico, so I guess that's an inordinate amount of time. And he mentioned I should ask you about the gargoyle that lives in the El Yunque rainforest, which sounds really interesting. Would this be something along the lines of a chupacabra, or are we talking a whole different sort of animal here?
Well, I'm definitely glad that you brought this up because I have found that Puerto Rico is, from all my travels, the one place where you have the highest odds of going for a short period of time and witnessing the paranormal.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's a small island. It's only 100 miles by about 60 miles. And, of course, it's in U.S. territory, so it makes it easy to travel there and to function there. And in Puerto Rico, what you find is that you not only have ghosts, but this is, the oldest place in U.S. territory. So you have incredible colonial history preserved there. You not only have UFO reportings, but you have Arecibo there, which is the largest satellite dish on the face of the planet. So if Earth has a telephone to the cosmos, that's it. You not only have cryptids there, but it's the birthplace of the chupacabra.
Mm-hmm.
You not only have, treasure stories there, but you have, this is the place where Ponce de Leon went to look for the Fountain of Youth. And you keep going down this list, all these chapels of miracles. And then, of course, it's one of the 3 points of the Bermuda Triangle. So I traveled down there and was really surprised by just how predictable the paranormal can become down there. And the El Yunque rainforest is a place, it's the only rainforest that is a U.S. national park. And they have outstanding experiences with a wide variety of cryptids. The chupacabra is the one that most people know, but there are other things that, there's one called the Guerra Diablo, which I think that's the one Micah was referring to, which is sort of like this little gargoyle-looking thing that just sort of appears and scares the hell out of people and then disappears. And then you have these Bigfoot-looking type creatures and some things that are so weird that you can't even really begin to classify them. And what I find is that nowadays we see so much in the news, in the media, about a chupacabra just being some mangy coyote who's sneaking onto some rancher's property. But when you go down there and you talk to people, you find that there are characteristics applied to the chupacabra that make it very obvious that this is either an interdimensional type creature or it's an alien. I mean, it for one thing, it kind of looks like an alien with these spines running down its back, and sometimes they talk about wings. And when people see it frequently, there will be this sort of a blur or a hazy kind of swirl that will develop around it, and this thing will just shoot off into the sky and disappear. I talked to a guy who told me a great story that I believe was sincere. He said that, he was a native there in Puerto Rico, and that his grandmother and a lot of people in his community had always said that almost 100 years ago, there was an occasion when they had a lot of their livestock being killed by some kind of creature that was frightening them, and so they set out a trap, some type of a box to trap this thing, and they put a goat inside the box. And in the middle of the night, all these men, they're standing around with their weapons and lights, and they're just waiting to hear this trap shut. And sure enough, it snaps shut. And the box is shaking around, and they had to build up their courage to even open it. And when they opened it, they found that here's the goat inside, and he's got the puncture wounds, and his blood's gone, but there's nothing in the box. So whatever was trapped in there apparently just vanished, and this goes beyond anything that we consider a physical, normal biological organism. This would definitely be a phantom.
Absolutely, yeah. It makes you wonder, going back to what you were saying about the Bigfoot thing, how sometimes the tracks disappear. I sometimes wonder if, let's say, for instance, we ever captured the Bigfoot. I think that maybe we'll find out that this is some kind of creature that can do these sort of things that we never even would have thought were possible, sort of like, to draw a corollary, like, the idea of like the lizards that regenerate their limbs and stuff. Let's say that we had never discovered that kind of thing before, and all we had was stories of people running into lizards or something and stepping on their arms, and then the lizard ran away and it grew back its arm, and people wouldn't believe it. People would say that's not possible. And I sometimes wonder if, we ever captured the Bigfoot or Chupacabra or something like that, that we just discover that this is some unique, amazing ability of this animal to leave, our space-time and go somewhere else. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. That is how I view it, because it seems to me that, there is nothing, scientifically speaking, that says creatures and that life has to exist within this realm that we consider physical. There's no basis for that in all of science, and yet people presume that because we're very egocentric, and we try to, anthropomorphize creatures, and we try to place everything around us in terms of ourselves, the man in the moon and so on, and it to me doesn't seem at all improbable that there are creatures that either exist at frequencies that are non-physical to us, or they teeter on a boundary and they're able to shift in and out, either at their own will or because of some environmental circumstances, such as this cosmic ebb and flow that we're just now beginning to understand. And it's inspiring to me to see some of these crazy stories coming out about this Hadron Collider, where, you have these rather mainstream scientists talking about influences from the future and interdimensional openings and things that have always been science fiction, but now there is mathematics to support the fact that we live in a multi-dimensional world, and there's no reason we should keep thinking of the world solely in terms of ourselves and our own experiences.
Exactly. It's really more a matter of getting the rest of the population caught up with us, as far as understanding how the parameters are changing so quickly.
Yeah, it's very rare for the latest breaking scientific news to be presented on the front page of a newspaper. It's always something that is more egocentrically based. It's something that we can relate to on a daily basis, because that's what most people are buying the newspapers for. And a lot of people don't realize that in October of 2006, scientists for the first time ever supposedly created the teleportation of a multi-atomic mass. Nobody knows this. I don't even understand exactly how they did it. But if you keep up with it, you see that among the people who are most qualified, who are actually doing the math, who have the resources, they may not go out there and talk about this on a frequent basis, but when you talk to them privately and personally, many of them are just as fascinated by all this and the paranormal as we are.
Absolutely. That's definitely the case. It seems like it's one of those it's like the old axiom, you get them at the bar and have a couple of beers in them, and they'll tell you some stuff that'll really blow your mind. But if you're at the conference or whatever, then chances are you're going to get the textbook version of the events unfolding.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And it really has to do with us acknowledging that these scientists are just people who are working for their tenure. They're working for their next paycheck, and they have to be careful about anything that could be used to ridicule them, because these are the most difficult mysteries in the world. And science has done a great job of allowing us to solve the simplest mysteries first over the past few hundred years. But now we've gotten to the point to where we're trying to apply this scientific thinking to the big mysteries, and the first step in the scientific process is observation. And yet, what if these things, because they are so rare and inconsistent, are things that cannot be observed in a year or 10 years? What if it takes 100 years? What if it takes 1,000 years? We just don't have enough of a recorded database there to put all those pieces together. And so there comes a point when you just have to form an opinion and a hypothesis and move forth from there.
It's pure speculation, I'm sure, but I'm interested in your point of view because you're obviously very well schooled in the phenomena of Puerto Rico and also, just the whole esoteric world in general. What do you think it is about Puerto Rico that makes it such a hotbed for, esoteric activity?
That is a great question, and I'm not certain of what the answer is. One thing, if you just want to look at Puerto Rico historically, here it is. It appears to be this, puny little island in the Caribbean, and yet the greatest powers in the world have been fighting over it for hundreds of years. First it was the Spanish, and then the English, and the Dutch, and the French, and finally the United States invaded and took it. And for one thing, probably, the reason that it's been so popular is because that it is a great base camp that sort of opens up this part of the Western world, so to speak. But as far as paranormal activity, the planet itself is this big electrodynamic ball of energy.
Yeah.
And, every second there are, thousands of lightning bolts hitting the planet somewhere, and the planet pulsates with this resonance, the Schumann resonance, which is usually, I think, about 8 hertz or something like that. And there is energy that is constantly, coming into and going out of our planet. And right around Puerto Rico, there is actually a spot, I think it's 25 miles off the coast of Puerto Rico. It's called the Puerto Rico Trench. And it's the deepest trench in the Atlantic Ocean there. And it could be that there is something about that trench that makes it easier for this very strange kind of earth energy to project forth and to shift that interdimensional boundary back and forth in and out of phase, and to allow that particular spot to occupy this kind of nebulous realm where all these phantasmagoria will occur. And from a physical perspective, that might be the explanation. Beyond that, I think there's also something about the mindset of the people around there that have built up layers upon layer of kind of imprints. The reason we call that area the Caribbean is because there was a tribe of natives called the Carib, and they were well known for being cannibals. In fact, the reason we have the word cannibal is because the Spanish called them the cannibalas, and they were despicable to the Spanish when the Spanish first arrived, because these very savage Caribs would sort of drift up under the dark quiet of night on a shore somewhere and come out and just absolutely wreak havoc and rampage a village, and they would take the women and girls hostage, and they would kill and eat the men and boys.
Oh, jeez.
And so that whole area, even going back for maybe even thousands of years, had that kind of phenomena taking place. And so it's still a bit of a mystery as to why precisely that Puerto Rico has so much, but it probably has something to do with at least those two variables. Yeah,
it raises something that I've been thinking about lately, too, is just these window zones. I think as Nick Redfern called them when I was talking to him recently, these parts of the world that seem to have everything going on.
Yeah.
Maybe something I'll look into more in the future. All right, now what about this film you made here, Inside the Church of Satan? This is why I'm a big fan of your stuff, Joshua, because, you know, here you are, you're talking about going to the International UFO Congress and presenting on hoaxes, and of course we talked about the Lemur group and how you guys have been doing sort of ghost investigations for almost 15 years now. And then here I read about this other film that you made, Inside the Church of Satan. So you've got your finger in all sorts of different pies, which I have a lot of respect for, and sort of is the mission statement, if you will, of our program, you know, to cover all the different sort of genres and stuff like that. So I'm very fascinated by what you might have uncovered here about this Church of Satan, because, you know, most people, when they hear that, they get a little freaked out probably, and they get kind of scared, and they think there's like animal sacrifices and stuff like that. But I have a feeling that you probably got a really good look at the inner workings of this church. So, you know, what's the Church of Satan all about?
Well, thank you for that, because I was the first person in over 40 years who was an outsider who was allowed to go within the Church of Satan. And really, the Church of Satan is a series of secret chambers that are located around the world. And I went to what is considered the central one, as referred by the head of the Church of Satan, Peter H. Gilmore. And, of course, the Church of Satan was founded by Anton LaVey. And if you read his book, The Satanic Bible, basically what you find is that he put forth a philosophy of atheism that also acknowledges the idea that there are paranormal powers that humans possess. And I was intrigued by whether or not there were magical practices that were being done within the Church of Satan that would produce some kind of incredible effect. I mean, you grow up reading these books and watching these movies about, wizards and sorcerers who can, create all these unimaginable sort of outcomes by simply, willing something to occur.
Yeah.
And most of the time you're surrounded by people who are trying to pretend that, they're good and they're positive and they're working with God and all this. But not so often do you come across somebody who says, I'm working with the devil here. So, I wanted to see, okay, well, can the devil do this stuff? Really, if you go and you hang out with the people who worship the devil, are they able to manifest demons? And the funny thing is that the people in the Church of Satan distinguish themselves from devil worshipers. And they say that devil worshipers are people who have bought into the Christian mythology that there are these two characters, God and the devil, and they don't believe that at all. They simply accept that, people have, powers that we might call ESP, and that those powers can be used to create magical outcomes. And as far as the experience of going inside the Church of Satan, my arrangement with them was that I would have, editorial control, that they would have, of course, no influence over whatever my opinion ended up being. But I wanted to sit down with all of them, all the way up to the head of the Church of Satan, which I did, the Black Pope. I sat down face-to-face with him and asked him all the toughest questions you could ever hope to ask. But the one thing that I told them in exchange is that I would not release the location of the places that I traveled to. And so I actually had to fly to another country with just one other person, C. Eric Scott, who is a filmmaker I've worked with on a number of projects. And it was just the two of us. We flew to another country. We got off the airplane. We were hassled a bit by customs. And then this guy met us at the airport who looked just like the devil.
Oh, man.
Yeah, this big, tall guy wearing a trench coat with the goatee and the piercing eyes and the pointy nose. And we got in his car, and he drove us off into this snowy, icy landscape as the sun was setting, much, much farther than we figured that we would be going into the countryside. We passed through this big gate, and when we finally got out in front of the house, we were greeted by a big, huge, black Great Dane. And when we went inside the house, I mean, on the outside, the house looked very normal. I was not allowed to show the outside of the house.
Yeah.
But on the inside, it looked just like what you would expect. I mean, it was antiquated, and they had a nice library with all kinds of books on the occult, and they had a bar there, and it was a pretty cozy environment. And then he starts taking us on a tour of the place, and every single thing in the place was fascinating. I mean, all the artwork and the workshop they had where they would create sculptures. So I'd gone through, and I thought that I'd seen the whole place, and I said, so, where do you do the rituals? And this guy turns around, and I swear, just like something out of Scooby-Doo, he reaches over to this shelf and maneuvers some kind of little, book or whatever, and this whole shelf just spun around, and here is a secret chamber.
Wow.
And so we walked through this secret chamber, and suddenly we are standing in the middle of one of the freakiest places I've ever been. In this hidden chamber, which was shaped like a trapezoid, and I think that they claimed the floor wasn't sloped, but it kind of felt like it because it was just, you kind of felt imbalanced in there. Your equilibrium was a little off. Everything's black. Here's the altar with swords and skulls and coffins and some of their most prized artifacts. They had, for example, material from the floor where Rasputin was murdered, and they hold him, Rasputin, very highly, and they had all kinds of original, Church of Satan artwork and stuff. And so they showed us on camera what this chamber was like, and then they opened one of the coffins in the room, and if you walk into the coffin, well, now this is another tunnel. And it leads you even deeper into a whole new section. And to me, it was impressive just to see the extent to which these folks had gone to create these secret chambers where their rituals are done. And I felt at that point, I mean, you must realize if they decided they were going to kill me or whatever, there's nothing I could have done about it. I mean,
yeah.
If I called 911, I wouldn't know where to tell them I was. I didn't even know the address of the place. And so I ended up staying there for a few days. And I mean, I slept there and ate with them and just lived with these Satanists. And that was one of the many things I did. I traveled around to different places around the country and talked to different people who were high-ranking in the organization. But finally, I was able to be the first person ever who was an outsider to witness and to document one of their magical rites, the rite of Ragnarok. And all these hooded people with swords and knives and stuff, they took me and Eric into this chamber, and they closed the door behind us and locked it. It was pretty creepy. And then they produced this ritual. But out of that whole experience, it was fascinating to explore everybody from a psychological point of view and to understand why they wanted to do this and sort of how their minds worked. But I didn't see them produce any of those, Harry Potter type effects. And so I don't think it's that easy to do that kind of thing. It may be impossible to do that kind of thing. But they claim that when they put curses out there on people, that eventually it works, that it resonates, it helps. And to me, I found it's kind of funny. A lot of people have this problem trying to understand how they can be essentially atheists, but at the same time believe that there is such a paranormal phenomenon that is sort of channeled through their rituals and their abilities. And also at one point during the movie, I sort of tongue-in-cheek decided I was going to try to conjure Satan up myself, and so I got a naked woman and laid her down on my dining room table, which my wife loved, by the way.
Yeah, I was going to say.
I have a very open-minded wife, and and I had the goat skull and the candles burning and the daggers and the satanic Bible and all that, and so I tried to conjure up Satan for an interview right there on camera, and Satan did not appear. But afterward, there were some other strange things that happened around my house. For example, there was this guy who's a friend of mine who's a minister who was coming to my house to bless my house after this had happened, and he was on his way over, and he got T-boned by another vehicle. It put him in the hospital, and the woman who was driving the other car claimed that her accelerator just pressed down on the car, and she couldn't control the car, and it was just like something out of The Omen, So,
Jesus.
Yeah, weird stuff like that did happen, but altogether, it was fascinating just to spend some time in that underworld.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. I got to pick this movie up. Where can people get a hold of the Inside the Church of Satan? Is that available online or something?
Yes, it is. So far, I have maintained control of all the rights, and if you go to InsideTheChurchOfSatan.com, you can see a trailer. You can watch it online if you want, and I will warn people there have been pirates and stuff who have BitTorrents out there, but we've gotten a lot of viruses.
Yeah, I would never even. Yeah, people shouldn't do that torrent stuff because it'll mess your computer up.
Sure, yeah, it's only like $7.95 or something cheap like that to just watch the thing honestly online. And then we also will sell DVDs. And if you watch the movie online and you like it and you buy the DVD, then we'll credit you for the amount you spent to watch it online.
Oh, that's a great deal.
Yeah, and that's InsideTheChurchOfSatan.com has got all that material, and that was a very cool experience. But at the same time, I felt kind of depressed after being around people for so long who delve into the ghoulish,
Yeah, well, I was going to ask you about that because now you said you stayed at the house for a few days and stuff like that. Are these guys who are into the Church of Satan and everything? Are they like that 24/7, or is there actually some downtime where they're like, all right, dude, we're gonna do the ritual later, but I gotta watch Judge Judy right now. Or so, they have do they have their normal moments where you're like, oh, okay, you're into the Church of Satan and you also enjoy, Survivor or something.
Yeah, well, they definitely live the philosophy 24 hours a day, and yet they also have no problem whatsoever about lying to everybody in society and pretending they are not Satanists if that's what it takes to maintain a job or to maintain a position of influence. And they don't have any kind of martyr mentality. None of them are willing to be burned at the stake because they're standing up for Satanism. And in fact, I even asked the Church of Satan head, the priest there who was the direct successor of Anton LaVey, I said, do you feel like you're a little bit of a wimp, you won't stand up for what you believe in? And he said, no. He said, not at all. And he was proud of the fact that they have politicians, they have celebrities, they have, teachers, people who on the outside live what appears to be very ordinary lives, but privately they're very highly actively engaged in this particular religion or philosophy, and so they believe it, and they'll 24 hours a day they're in that mindset, but they're more than happy to put on a good acting job and deceive you if need be.
Now I know you recently put out your list of top 10 scariest monsters, and Micah implored to me that I ask you about the Popo Bawa,
right.
the demon serial rapist of Zanzibar. And unfortunately, that was my nickname in college, too. It sort of has a weird connection with me. But really, though, in all seriousness, what is this Popo Bawa? It sounds terrifying.
Yeah, Popo Bawa is the most severe, the most demeaning of all of these sort of demonic cryptozoological presences that I've come across. And indeed, this has been reported around Tanzania for years. Basically, Popo Bawa is reported to be this sort of 7 to 8 foot tall, black, sort of leathery humanoid with wings and these long, powerful fingers with these curved talons protruding from the ends. And Popo Bawa will appear at night in the bedrooms, mainly of men.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, and by the time men realize what's going on, it's too late. Popo Bawa has them pressed face down onto the mattress, and he, viciously rapes them. And then the thing that makes it even weirder is that Papa BoAA, when he is done, will actually lean down and breathe his hot, rank breath into their ears, and then he will speak to them, which is something you don't hear very often.
Jesus, this is scary.
Yeah, you can see why this is pretty darn frightening.
It sounds like a prison film.
Yes. And Papa BoAA says in their ear, "If you don't tell everybody what I have done to you, I am going to come back in a week, and it's going to be 10 times worse." And then he leaves.
Jesus.
And so it's bad enough that you are being, terrorized and raped in your bedroom at night. It's even worse that you have to tell everybody about it.
Yeah, that's something you want to keep to yourself.
Well, I would imagine, yeah. And yet this is, this is completely unique in the world of demonology and cryptozoology, so far as I know. I've just never heard of anything quite like that, and the fact that this creature is so vicious, he wants to add insult to injury. Now, one funny thing about this is that, in Africa, there has been just mass savage raping of women going on for many, many years. And so a lot of people have wondered if some of these women who are familiar with, voodoo and other African tribal magic have actually gotten together and ritualistically created Papa BoAA as an agent of vengeance to go out there and vindicate them, so to speak, and terrorize some of these men. And but it's so difficult to get the facts on that, because that it's just so unbelievable. And yet, sure enough, you can, if you don't believe me, you can go research this for yourself, Papa BoAA, and you'll see that there's a whole tradition of people who say they've experienced this.
Now, is this something that goes back centuries, or is this something that sort of has emerged, more recently, and do these Papa BoAA attacks actually still happen, from time to time in contemporary times?
Well, they're still happening, and in fact, I first learned about this a few years ago by reading an article about it in the Fortean Times. And I think that what we consider the real Papa BoAA phenomenon has kind of peaked just since the early 1990s. But as is often the case, you have people out there who claim that there are similar things that have been reported for hundreds of years in that area. But now, whether or not it's the same thing, we just can't be certain of that. But to me, and by the way, Papa BoAA, it's a Swahili name, and it literally translates into bat wing. So it's a reference to the fact that this thing, it flies in like some big ghoulish, bat-like demon to do this. But there are ideas about this being a shapeshifter that's been around for a long time.
Yikes! That's just bizarre. It's beyond creepy, almost.
Yeah.
One thing I know that you're really excited about that you guys have going on, that's the Lemur Laboratory. So tell me a little bit about what that's all about and what you guys are doing with the Lemur Laboratory.
Yeah, well, for so many years, we have kept just an action-packed schedule of going out there and gathering field data at a variety of locations around, the world. And once in a while, you have to sort of stop and take this mountain of data you've collected and look into your archives to determine how this information should be used to actually understand what's going on.
Yeah.
And so I for a long time, I've wanted us to have a lab to ourselves that was proficient enough and had all the necessary equipment so that we could try to adapt some of what we have learned into controlled lab experiments. And when we made the cover of the Science Journal in 2004, back then I was utilizing the lab of a friend named Charles Yost. who's dead now. He was a NASA Hall of Fame engineer, and we were fortunate to have access to his wonderful lab and facilities. But after he died, the whole thing kind of fell into disarray, and so that's when it became clear that if we were to continue, we needed to have our own lab. And it's been a long process of gradually putting all the components in place to get a lab environment together that is good enough for us to be able to start, adapting some of what we've learned into lab experiments. And what we are researching right now in the lab is this very weird thing we call the ray, which is this coherent thread-like stream of energy that we've been able to produce that it doesn't seem to be electrical, doesn't seem to be magnetic. It's not affected by electricity or magnetism. It's not affected by radiation. It's not affected by heat turbulence. We can't figure out for the time being what this thing is that defies any kind of interaction with all those energies. And we, however, are hopeful that this stream of energy might actually be a tiny little tunnel that we're creating, because we're using the only way we can see it is using a special system at our lab called Schlieren optical visualization, which uses a series of cameras and astronomical quality concave mirrors in order to allow us to see very, very subtle changes in the density of air between 2 points. And we are thinking, if this is indeed a tunnel of some kind that we're looking at here, if we're able to enlarge it and magnify it, then we might be able to actually, peek down the middle of it and see into another dimension. And that's sort of our ultimate goal there at the lab, is to see if we can artificially create some kind of an interdimensional warp that will give us access to these other realms.
That's wild. That's amazing. That's some groundbreaking stuff right there.
Well, you're right. It is. It really is. And this was, we have a whole list of things that we want to do, but that was top of the list. And to me, the night that we were able to create the ray, I bought a bottle of champagne.
Yeah.
We uncorked that thing, and that was an historic night for me. So for people who want to sort of see pictures of this and understand more what I'm talking about, if you go to lemurlabresearch.com, you'll find photographs there and a little more of a description about what we're working on. But we don't know if this is what's considered part of the dark flow or dark matter. There are just, we just sit around and we talk about this for hours. And in fact, we had a lemur meeting last night, and the night ended in us, sitting around and talking about all kinds of new approaches we're going to take to try to figure out what this is and how to expand it. But we may actually be looking at something that we can actually manipulate, that we can actually control, that will finally give us, maybe something like a wormhole that we can use to directly access these other dimensions.
That sounds amazing. Be careful what might come out of the other end of that. Yikes.
Yeah, that's right. We're a little concerned about that, especially with all these stories about the Hadron Collider, and it's sort of like we've reached this critical point collectively amongst researchers where we're all in our own way kind of working toward the same goals, and I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know. To me, that ray right now, it represents the absolute embodiment of the unknown and the paranormal.
You got to take that kind of risk, in general. That's sort of my attitude. As a journalist, I cheer for the story. So if it unleashes a whole horde of demons on the human race, at the end of the day, maybe it was probably worth it just to say you did it.
Hopefully it won't be a bunch of Papa Bawas.
Oh, geez. No, we don't want we don't want that. At the risk of opening up a whole can of worms, but I'm excited to find out, what these worms are all about, I guess you could say. What's next for you? What do you have cooking, at the Lemur Lab other than this Ray thing? And, I'm sure you're working on some books and some research projects and, God only knows, movies. Who knows? You got the radio show. What do you have going on that people can check out and be looking forward to checking out in the future from you?
Yeah, yeah, that is a big question. 2010 is already getting booked up. I do plan on, if everything goes according to plan, making a feature film in 2010 about the creepiest haunted house that I ever investigated, and it's a house where a massacre occurred. And so we'll see if all that falls into place, because this is the kind of thing where we're talking with real name actors and all that. So that's one thing I've got on my agenda. I'm getting the screenplay finished up for that. And indeed, the Lemur Lab in and of itself is a full-time job. I mean, we are doing so many experiments in 2010. We are planning to not only try to open these portals and so on, but to do more experiments with humans to try to understand what it is about the human experience that allows people to encounter the unknown. Simple things, for example, like taking an array of LEDs that span from the infrared to the ultraviolet and taking 100 people, 50 of whom have seen ghosts and 50 have not, and testing each one of them, testing their eyes out to see if there is a particular frequency that people are looking into when they most often see an apparition. Building models, miniature scale models of haunted houses, and trying to reproduce some of the effects in the haunted houses by adding various voltages to the different floors and seeing if we can create capacitance effects that will explain why that some places in the house are more prone to producing these things than others. All that kind of stuff. And then as far as the, just commercial types of things, I've been hired to do a big cruise down into the Caribbean, a paranormal cruise, and I've got information there at joshuapwarren.com. And they've hired a bunch of different paranormal experts for the 7-day cruise down into the Bermuda Triangle. And
oh, yikes!
Yeah, and of course that's a place I'm very familiar with. But talk about fun! I love cruising. I mean, I've just got so many things, from investigations to experiments to the movies and the radio stuff. To me, at this point, is just a common staple of a weekly schedule. So you can always rely on that. But I think really what it boils down to is that we've reached the point now where we're understanding enough, and we have enough equipment, and we have enough resources to actually start plucking at that sort of string that seems to separate us from this other realm. And we're trying to resonate that boundary. We're trying to disturb it and disrupt it. And we're fortunate because, we've been to so many paranormally active places that now we can take the frequencies and the voltages and all the things that we found at those places and sort of reproduce them in order to get the kind of effects that we're looking for in the lab. And there's no way of knowing how close to success we may be here, but 2010, it could be the year when we finally are able to say, okay, listen up, everybody. If you want to look into the other dimension, here's how you do it.
Sounds good. And, of course, people can find out more from you at joshuapwarren.com. Yep,
joshuapwarren.com has got links to everything.
And I got to ask you, before I let you go here, before I do the wrap-up, what is this Kelly Pickler on a ghost hunt I see on your website here? You ghost hunting with the American Idol's own Kelly Pickler?
Yeah. In fact, that was a Halloween event that we did at the radio station, and as it turns out, Kelly Pickler and some of her publicists are apparently big ghost hunting fans, and they knew who I was, and they'd been reading my books, and were kind of surprised to find that I was hosting a radio program at this particular station, and said, hey, let's put together a ghost hunt for Halloween. So as sort of a promotional thing for her and everybody else, I was able to gain access to the Smith McDowell House, which is the oldest mansion here in Asheville, North Carolina, and they have just a very long history of deaths and tragedies. And so we took her and some of the big corporate bigwigs there from her record label on this ghost hunt for the evening, and she just had a wonderful time.
That sounds cool, yeah. I'd love to, I'm going to have to watch that video at length now when I get the chance. But yeah, definitely folks should check that one out on joshuapwarren.com as well. Tons of stuff on there. It's jam-packed. Well, Joshua, I can't thank you enough for coming on the show. It's been a long time coming. We should have had you on much earlier than this, but as much like you, my schedule's jam-packed, so I'm finally glad I got a chance to sit down and talk with you. We really only scratched the surface of the research that you've done. I mean, we didn't even touch the Brown Mountain Lights and all your amazing research into that, but of course we're going to have you back on the show in the future to talk about that stuff and the emerging stuff that you're working on right now. And I'm just stunned by how fast this conversation went by. I mean, we did almost 2 hours here, and it feels like I just picked up the phone to call you. So it was really quite an enjoyable conversation. It was great talking to you, great finally meeting you in the virtual sense, if you will, and I hope this is just the beginning of future adventures for the two of us and our mutual buddy there, Micah A. Hanks.
Well, Tim, I commend you for all the fantastic work that you are doing, and yes, we are all in a circle of very productive people who have the right mindset to move forth, and so it's been a lot of fun, and yes, we've only scratched the surface, so I'll be more than happy to come back and give you updates on what we're doing, and thank you very much for the invitation to have me on here tonight.
That does it for this week's edition of BoA Audio Season 5. Big, super huge thanks to Joshua P. Warren for coming on the show. You can check out his website, www.joshuapwarren.com. All one word, joshuapwarren.com. Check it out. Also want to extend an additional thanks to Joshua for having me on his show. Speaking of strange, had a great time appearing on the program. You can find linkage to that at joshuapwarren.com as well. And to top it all off, we want to thank Micah A. Hanks for his insights into the career of Joshua P. Warren. Gave us tons of avenues to explore for this conversation. Thanks again, Micah, for your input on this episode. Moving on, let's dive into the BoA Audio listener feedback mailbag. We have so many emails to get to that were accumulated over the hiatus. I picked out 3 here this week to tackle for the return of the feedback. And as luck would have it, it's 3 international listeners, 2 from Australia, 1 from Canada. Let's just get cooking on these because there's quite a lot to talk about. The first email comes from James in Perth, Australia, and here's what he has to say. Just a quick email to thank you for the quality of programs archived. Good luck with the next season. Love the Bruce Rocks trilogy. I've had 15 plus years of searching, whether metaphysical, theosophical, psychological, religious, cults, media, etc. Sometimes delusional, occasionally tasting the sugar yet mostly burned out, until I recently have been reinvigorated with curiosity, thanks to shows like yours. Something is happening. I'm cynical due to overexposure of the 90s New Age nonsense, even though I've had many experiences, including visits from friendly beings, who seem to work on me for 45 minutes, and a separate ayahuasca god experience. Anyway, I could carry on, but I'm sure you've heard it before. Regards, James in Perth, Australia. Thanks for writing in, James. Always great to hear from the international listeners, and really quite humbling, not only to hear from someone so far away in Australia, but to know that we played a part in reinvigorating their interest in the esoteric. That is really cool. Thank you for sharing that with us, James. Really appreciate it. I agree that something is happening. What it is, I have no idea, but there does seem to be a percolating going on here over the last few years. Thankfully, the 90s New Age nonsense is behind us. I'm not quite sure how we're going to look back on this decade that ends when this month ends, but I think we'll look back on it as perhaps a time of reawakening, reinvestigation, and evolution in the world of esoterica. That's what I feel like we'll say about the aughts when we look back on them. Glad to hear you like the Bruce Rux trilogy. Stick around. Bruce will definitely be back in Season 5. I keep in good contact with him, and I am looking forward to talking to him again and bringing him back on BoA Audio to discuss his first book and a whole bunch of other sci-fi related stuff that's gone down since we had our first interview. So once again, thanks for writing in, James in Perth, Australia. Next up comes an email from Nick in Canada with some guest suggestions. Here's what he has to say. Wanted to commend you on a truly awesome lineup of guests over the past few seasons. I discovered your radio show purely by chance, but have been seriously into the UFO phenomenon for over 20 years now. Some guests I'd love for you to think about getting on the next season, all of whom can be found on Google. David Sarita. I swear to God this man could be the new Einstein. His groundbreaking research on the infamous Tether incident and NASA UFOs is reason alone to get him on. But not only that, he is an expert on anti-gravity and all things esoteric. Richard C. Hoagland. Say no more. Get him talking about the moon or Mars and you've got a show right there. Sergeant Clifford Stone. Had met an EBE and was on the Stephen Greer panel for the Disclosure Project event in 2001. Whitley Strieber, famous abductee and author. Stephen Greer, you know who this guy is. Cheers and best of luck for the future. Nick in Canada. Well, Nick, first of all, thanks for writing in. Really appreciate that you shot us an email with some guest suggestions. Very cool that you just discovered BoA Audio. Hopefully you're digging into our archive. Lots of great UFO guests in there. I am well aware of all the folks that you listed, and they are definitely on the radar for BoA Audio. I can't make any promises, but as you know, with this program, I love the A-list guests, and there are definitely some A-list guests in that mix, as well as some folks with some truly compelling stories. I would definitely like to interview all of them eventually on BoA Audio, whether it's in Season 5 or not, I can't be sure just yet, but they are definitely folks who are on the list to get on BoA Audio eventually in the future. So stay tuned to the program. You never know when one of the superstars and the supernovas of esoteric research are going to pop up on BoA Audio. Thanks again for writing in, Nick. And we move to the final email of the week, and that comes from Roseanne, also in Australia. 2 emails from Australia. We actually got quite a few emails during the hiatus from folks in Australia. It's quite amazing the grassroots following we have down there in Australia. I would love to go to Australia someday, folks. It is something that I have wanted to do for a very long time. BoA might stand for Banal of Australia someday. That would be pretty neat. But let's get into Roseanne's email. Here's what she has to say. Just listen to the Columbine Conspiracy episode of BoA Audio. Fantastic show, as usual. But I did hear you say in the emails you read on another show that William Zabel's website is down, etc. I have tried to read some of his book on that page, but some stupid error comes up. Have you been able to establish what has happened to him and his webpage? I also had to laugh the other night, as I usually listen to you whilst walking or at night, so I'm not sure what episode it was, but you read an email where the guy asks if you are lighting a cigarette. Oh my God, that's exactly what I was thinking every time I hear that very noise. Is he having a smoke? Really do love the shows. Hurry back. Roseanne in Australia. Thanks for writing in, Roseanne. You touched on 2 of the big topics from BoA Audio listener feedback last year. It's time for my monthly update on William Zabel. Still no word from the Z-Man, folks. I don't know what's going on. At some point, I just kind of gave up on trying to get in touch with William Zabel. How many times can you call someone and not get an answer? How many times can you email and not hear back from them until you just give up? That's kind of what happened. I'll make a renewed effort after the new year to try and get in touch with William Zabel, but at this point, we're just going to have to wait it out and hope he resurfaces at some point in the future. As always, if there's ever any break in this story, I will let you all know as soon as possible, because the number of emails we got, not just on the William Zabel episode, but the William Zabel disappearance, is frightening, to be honest with you. So a lot of folks have been waiting to hear what's going on with William Zabel, and I will do my best to eventually track him down. Regarding the smoking, I told the folks at the end of Season 4 that I was going to work on quitting smoking. Unfortunately, the beast still has his mitts firmly wrapped around me as far as smoking goes. I'm doing my best still to cut down on my cigarette smoking, but it is a battle, as anyone who's been an addict to the smokes can tell you. I've been thinking of hypnotism lately, actually, but it's expensive, and I'm kind of weary of doing that, because what if I pay the $200+ for the hypnosis, and then next thing you know, I'm smoking 2 or 3 days later? I can't get my money back for that. So I'm investigating hypnosis. If I could get free hypnosis, I would be down for that in a heartbeat, but I also don't want to put my mind in the hands of some amateur crazy person either. So we got to be careful who you let hypnotize you. But I am investigating hypnosis. I might try it. I would like to turn it into a show, possibly. Maybe we do an interview with the hypnosis guy. I found someone around here, and we give the hypnosis thing a try and defeat the crippling addiction to cigarettes that I have. I'll be the first to admit it. Smoking is not cool, folks. Don't smoke. I wish I'd never started, and I'm doing my best here to ultimately defeat the cigarettes. But until then, you're going to be hearing the infamous click, click, click on the programs. You probably heard a few of them already tonight on the show, as I was hacking butts throughout all the interviews we've taped so far in Season 5. But that's part of the raw appeal of BoA Audio. You're listening to the real conversation with the real weird stuff going on in the background. Cigarettes, smoking, roosters in Jim Marr's backyard. It's all fair game here on BoA Audio. Thanks again, Roseanne, for writing in, and once again, thanks to Nick in Canada and James in Perth, Australia. BoA Audio listeners spanning the globe, you guys are awesome. Really appreciate you writing in and your support during our downtime. The fun has just begun here on BoA Audio listener feedback. If you want to be a part of it, if you want to join in on the conversations that go on here at the end of the show, there's 3 really easy ways to get in touch with me. Let me go through the list for you. First, you can just go to binallofamerica.com, BINNALL of America.com. Click the contact button. That'll provide you with the information on how to write to me on my primary email address, or you can write to my backup email, boaaudio@hotmail.com. I check that all the time, so don't worry if you're just going to write to that one. And the third way is more interactive and quite a bit of fun. It is the official BoA forum, the US of E.com, THEUSOFE.com. Any of those methods puts your correspondence into my hands for a future edition of BoA Audio listener feedback. And while I'm on the subject of the official BoA forum, the US of E.com, you definitely want to swing over there for the 2009 edition of Ask Stanton Friedman. We did it last year for the holidays special. It was a huge success. Stan loved it. I loved it. We had so much fun reading those questions from the BoA Audio listeners who are a part of the official BoA forum, the US of E.com. So we're going to do it again this year, and the thread is already open at the USofE.com. So get on over there and post your question. Even if you're not a forum fan, you can just join up one time only, post the question, and then bail, and you never have to come back. I won't take it personally. It's no big deal. Hopefully you do join up if you haven't joined already, and you get involved in some of these conversations at the official forum and really make yourself at home there with some of the great folks who are members of the US of E, because we'd love to have you. We love expanding the circle and the community that is the official BoA forum. Nonetheless, Ask Stanton Friedman, the 2009 edition, up and running right now at the USofE.com. Deadline to submit your question is December 11th, 2009. So you got about 9 days left here to get your question formulated and posted at the USofE, and then sit back and wait for the holiday special, and you'll get to hear Stan Friedman answer your question. Up next, as always, it is the thanks portion of the show. Let me roll through the list of the outstanding Banal of America staff. Leslie, Chiron, R. Lee, Joe V, Tina Senna, Rochelle Hawks, Richard Thomas, A.M. Murphy, and Marla Pena, as well as our webmaster, Jeremy Boston, and our contributing cartoonist, Andy Carolyn. I'm going to get back into the habit of detailing and plugging their columns starting next week. I'm kind of running on fumes here for you this week, but I say it all the time, and it's the truth. If you're only listening to BoA Audio and you're not reading the columns at banalofamerica.com, you're only getting half the story. So come on over to Banal of America if you haven't visited the website before. The URL address is www.binallofamerica.com. Check it out. As I bemoaned at the beginning of the program, it is the holiday season. We've got the holiday special coming up. I'm excited about that. The holiday season, though, always gives me a little indigestion. Since it is the holiday season, I turn to you now, the fantastic BoA Audio listeners, the hardcore listeners, the ones who stick around all the way through the program, even listening to me ramble here at the end of the show. And I ask you to make a donation to the program, make a donation to Banal of America, help us keep the ship up and running. How do you do that? Pretty simple. You go to banalofamerica.com, click the PayPal button. That'll take you to PayPal. They'll walk you through the process. It's so simple a caveman could do it. And as always, no donation is too small, and all donations go towards Banal of America and BoA Audio to help keep the program and the website in business, commercial-free, and freely available for all of our great readers and listeners the world over. Do your part, help out BoA, make it a happy holiday for us. We would hugely appreciate it. Next week on the program, we return to the realm of UFOs with one of the most tireless and hardworking researchers in all of ufology. The director of the National UFO Reporting Center, Peter Davenport, returns to BoA Audio for a discussion on all things related to the National UFO Reporting Center and the world of ufology. We're going to get an update from Peter on what's been going on at the NUFORC. We're going to discuss some compelling cases that he's come across in the last few years. We're going to really delve into a sort of behind-the-scenes look at the NUFORC. What are the good developments that have come up since Peter took over the organization? What are the bad developments that have happened since he became the director of the NUFORC in 1994? We're going to get his thoughts on the woeful coverage of UFOs by the media and a really amazing and compelling story from him about his meeting with government officials in 1997. This stuff had me on the edge of my seat, and it will blow your mind when you hear it. I'd never heard this story before until this conversation with Peter Davenport, and it was some stunning, stunning stuff. Plus, of course, tons and tons more. It is really a very entertaining and fascinating edition of BoA Audio with someone who puts in probably more man-hours to the field of ufology than just about anybody else in all of UFO studies. Peter Davenport, the director of the National UFO Reporting Center, he returns to BoA Audio next week. And on that note, we close the book here on another edition of BoA Audio. Big thanks once again to Joshua P. Warren, Micah A. Hanks for his insights, and all of the great BoA Audio listeners. Thank you for finding us upon our return and making us a part of your esoteric audio playlist. Until next time, this is Tim Banal, thanking you for listening and signing off.